When my sister Rachel called me 3 months before her dream wedding to tell me I wasn't invited because I was not real family, I felt something inside me shatter and rebuild itself in the same devastating moment that would change both of our lives forever. We were sitting in the cozy corner of Henderson's coffee shop, the same intimate booth where we had shared countless conversations over the years about everything from childhood dreams to adult disappointments. The same worn wooden table where she had cried to me about her previous breakups and heartaches, while I handed her tissues and listened for hours. Where I had helped her strategically plan her entire relationship with Mark, from their very first awkward date to his eventual proposal. Where she had asked me to be her maid of honor just 6 months earlier, with tears of pure joy streaming down her face as she begged me to help make her wedding day absolutely perfect in every conceivable way. But now she sat across from me with cold, calculating eyes that I barely recognized as belonging to the sister I had grown up with, and delivered the words that would destroy everything I thought I knew about our relationship, my place in our family, and the unconditional love I had always taken for granted. You're adopted, Jessica. You're not real family, and Mark's family is very traditional and particular about these things. It would be incredibly awkward and inappropriate having you there when you don't actually share our blood or our family heritage or lineage. The casual cruelty in her voice, the way she dismissed 28 years of sisterhood as if it meant absolutely nothing more than a childhood friendship that had run its course. The complete absence of any guilt, remorse, or acknowledgement of how devastating her words would be to someone who had been her closest friend and confidant since we were children sharing bedrooms and secrets. It all hit me like a series of physical blows that left me struggling to breathe and process what was ours, happening to the relationship that had been the most important constant in my entire life. I had helped plan every single detail of this elaborate wedding over the past year, had spent countless hours listening to her obsess over centerpieces and dress fittings and vendor selections with the patience of someone who genuinely cared about her happiness, had co-signed the substantial loan for her dream venue when her credit wasn't good enough to secure the booking alone, had even paid for her elaborate engagement party when money was tight and her future in-laws were expecting a celebration worthy of their elevated social status and community standing. But apparently, none of that mattered anymore. None of the sacrifice and support and unconditional love meant anything, because I didn't share the same DNA as the rest of the Morrison family, despite being legally adopted when I was 3 years old and having no memory of any other family or any other life than the one I had built with these people I called my parents and sister. What I did next would expose a secret so devastating and perfectly ironic that it would destroy not just Rachel's perfect wedding and social climbing aspirations, but the entire foundation of lies and carefully constructed deception our family had been built on for decades, and show her exactly what happens when you try to erase someone who knows all your secrets and has the resources and determination to uncover all your lies. The wedding Rachel was planning with obsessive, all-consuming dedication was supposed to be the social event of the year in our small town, a lavish affair that had been featured multiple times in the local newspaper's society pages and had become the primary topic of conversation among everyone we knew since she got engaged to Mark Hendricks, whose family owned the largest and most successful construction company in 3 counties and wielded considerable influence in local business, politics, and social circles that extended far beyond our small community. Rachel had been obsessing over every minute detail for over a year, spending money she didn't actually have on a designer dress that cost more than most people's annual car payments, booking the most expensive and exclusive venue in the entire state, hiring vendors who normally worked celebrity weddings in major cities and charged prices that reflected their prestigious clientele and exclusive reputation in the luxury wedding industry. She had been planning this wedding like it was her final audition for a completely different lifestyle, her golden ticket and entrance into the wealthy, established social circle that came with marrying into the Hendricks family name, fortune, and generations of accumulated social influence and community power. Mark's family had old money and even older prejudices, the kind of people who traced their lineage back multiple centuries with pride, and genuinely believed that bloodline and genetic heritage determined personal worth, social standing, and family value in ways that made them deeply suspicious and disapproving of anyone who didn't fit their extremely narrow definition of appropriate family connections and acceptable social backgrounds. Rachel had been increasingly anxious and obsessive about impressing them throughout their entire engagement period, constantly worried about saying or doing something that might make them question whether she was truly worthy of their son and heir, whether she possessed the proper breeding and background necessary to maintain their family's reputation and social standing in the community they had dominated for generations. She had been gradually changing herself to fit their rigid expectations and conservative worldview, adopting their political views even when they contradicted beliefs she had held her entire life, joining their exclusive country club despite never having shown any interest in golf or tennis or the social activities that defined their lifestyle, even attending their traditional Episcopal church every Sunday, despite never having shown any genuine interest in religion or spiritual matters before. Mark came along with his family's expectations and social requirements that seemed to multiply with each passing month. The conversation that would shatter our relationship forever and change the trajectory of both our lives had started innocently enough, with Rachel asking me to meet her for coffee to discuss some final wedding details and to go over my carefully prepared maid of honor speech one more time before the big day that was rapidly approaching with all the excitement and anxiety that comes with such major life events. I had been genuinely looking forward to this meeting with anticipation and sisterly excitement, eager to share some creative ideas I had been developing for her bachelorette party that would involve all her closest friends from different periods of her life, and to finalize the detailed timeline for the wedding weekend festivities that would involve coordinating multiple events and dozens of family members and friends from various parts of the country who would be traveling to celebrate with us. I had brought a carefully organized folder full of notes and suggestions, had spent hours researching wedding traditions and planning special touches that would make her day absolutely perfect and memorable for all the right reasons, creating moments that would become cherished memories for years to come. But the moment I sat down across from her in our usual booth, the one we had claimed as our own since we were teenagers, sneaking coffee dates between classes and sharing dreams about our future lives, I could tell immediately that something was fundamentally different about her demeanor and attitude toward me that went beyond normal pre-wedding stress or anxiety. She seemed nervous and uncomfortable in a way that was completely unlike her normal confident personality, avoiding direct eye contact and fidgeting constantly with her expensive engagement ring in the way she always did when she was about to deliver bad news or have a difficult conversation that she had been dreading and postponing. When she finally looked up at me and started talking, her voice had a rehearsed, artificial quality that made it clear she had practiced this conversation multiple times before actually having it with me, probably in front of a mirror, or with Mark coaching her on how to deliver the devastating news she was about to share in the most efficient and final way possible. "Jessica, I need to talk to you about something really important regarding the wedding," she began, with the formal, distant tone of someone conducting a business meeting rather than talking to her sister and closest friend. "Mark's family has some serious concerns about the wedding party composition, and we've had to make some really difficult decisions about who can and can't be included in the ceremony itself." The formal, distant way she was speaking to me like I was a problematic vendor or service provider rather than her sister and maid of honor sent chills down my spine and made me realize that whatever was coming next was going to fundamentally change our relationship forever in ways that couldn't be undone or taken back once the words were spoken. But nothing in my life experience could have prepared me for the devastating blow that came next, when Rachel looked me directly in the eyes with a coldness I had never seen before and delivered the words that would haunt me for years to come and completely redefine how I understood our family dynamics and my place in the world. "You're not invited to the wedding," she said with the same emotionless tone she might use to discuss the weather forecast or cancel a casual lunch appointment. "You're not real family, and Mark's family is very traditional and specific about these things. It would be awkward and uncomfortable having you there when you don't actually share our blood or our family history." She went on to explain in excruciating detail, as if she was doing me some kind of generous favor by being brutally honest, that the Hendricks family had conducted extensive and thorough research into our family background as part of their formal acceptance of Rachel into their exclusive social circle, and they had discovered that I was adopted, which apparently made me completely unsuitable for inclusion in their family wedding photos and celebrations that would be preserved for future generations. According to Rachel, who delivered this information with the detached efficiency of a lawyer reading a contract, Mark's mother had specifically and explicitly requested that only blood relatives be included in the wedding party and ceremony, to maintain what she pretentiously called family authenticity, and to avoid any confusion about lineage and genetic heritage that might arise in future generations when people looked back at wedding photos and attempted to trace family trees and bloodlines for genealogical purposes. The casual way Rachel delivered this devastating news, as if she was simply following reasonable social protocols rather than destroying our lifelong relationship, and everything I thought I knew about my place in her life, revealed a level of callousness and cruelty I had never seen in her before, and hadn't known she was capable of displaying towards someone she claimed to love. She actually seemed to believe that I should understand and accept her decision gracefully. that I should be grateful she was being honest with me rather than making up some other excuse to exclude me from the most important day of her life, as if her honesty somehow made her betrayal less devastating and hurtful and more socially acceptable. What made this betrayal even more devastating and personally crushing was the gradual realization that this conversation represented the culmination of months of subtle but significant changes in Rachel's behavior toward me that I had noticed but hadn't fully understood or interpreted correctly until this moment of brutal clarity and revelation. She had been systematically distancing herself from me since getting engaged to Mark, canceling our regular sister dates and movie nights that had been sacred traditions since we were teenagers, avoiding family gatherings where I would be present and might interact with Mark's family members, making elaborate excuses when I suggested we spend time together like we always had throughout our lives as sisters and best friends who shared everything. I had attributed these changes to normal pre-wedding stress and the overwhelming demands of planning such an elaborate celebration, never imagining that she was actually being coached by her future in-laws to minimize her relationship with me in preparation for this ultimate rejection and exclusion from her new life. Looking back now with the painful clarity that comes from betrayal and broken trust, I could see that every interaction we had had over the past year had been building toward this moment, with Rachel gradually testing boundaries and gauging my reactions to see how much distance she could create between us without causing a complete family explosion that might interfere with her wedding plans and social aspirations. She had been systematically devaluing our relationship and my place in her life, preparing herself emotionally to cut me out entirely when the time came to choose between her sister and her social aspirations, between the family that had raised her and the family she wanted to marry into for status and financial security. The fact that she had been planning this betrayal for months while continuing to involve me in wedding preparations, allowing me to invest significant time, money, and emotional energy into an event I was never actually going to be allowed to attend, showed a level of calculated cruelty and manipulation that I hadn't known my sister was capable of, and that completely changed how I viewed her character and our shared history of what I had thought was unconditional sisterly love. The devastating truth about my adoption, which Rachel wielded like a weapon in that coffee shop conversation, was something that had never been a secret in our family, but had apparently become a source of shame and social liability for her, now that she was trying to impress people who valued bloodline over relationships and genetic heritage over personal character and individual worth. I had been adopted when I was 3 years old after my biological parents died in a tragic car accident that left me orphaned and alone, brought into the Morrison family by parents who had always treated me exactly the same as they treated Rachel, who had never made me feel like anything other than their daughter in every way that mattered emotionally, legally, and practically in our daily family life. My adoption had been finalized both legally and emotionally decades ago, and I had never considered myself anything other than a Morrison family member with all the rights, responsibilities, and emotional connections that came with that identity, and belonging that had shaped my entire sense of self. Rachel and I had grown up as sisters in every sense of the word, sharing bedrooms and childhood secrets, fighting over toys and clothes and parental attention like all siblings do, supporting each other through elementary school challenges and teenage heartbreaks and young adult struggles that had bonded us in ways that I thought were unbreakable. She had never treated my adoption status as anything other than an interesting piece of family history, had never suggested that it made me less her sister or less part of our family unit and shared identity that we had built together over decades of shared experiences. But apparently, her perspective on our relationship had changed dramatically once she realized that acknowledging me as her sister might interfere with her acceptance into the Hendricks family social circle and the exclusive lifestyle she desperately wanted to access through her marriage to Mark and the doors that would open for her in their wealthy community. The fact that she was willing to sacrifice our lifelong relationship for the approval of people who judged worth based on genetics rather than character showed me exactly where her true priorities lay, and what kind of person she had chosen to become in pursuit of social status and financial security that mattered more to her than family loyalty. But what Rachel didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been quietly investigating some puzzling inconsistencies in our family history for several months, and I had discovered information that would completely destroy the narrative she was using to justify my exclusion from her wedding and her life. While researching genealogy information for an elaborate family tree project I was working on as a surprise gift for our parents' upcoming 35th wedding anniversary, I had uncovered some shocking discrepancies in official documents that didn't match the story we had always been told about our family origins and relationships that had formed the foundation of our family identity. Through careful and methodical investigation involving public records research, DNA testing through multiple services for accuracy, and discreet conversations with distant relatives who had knowledge of family secrets that had been buried and hidden for decades to protect reputations and avoid difficult conversations, I had learned something that would change everything. Rachel herself was not the biological daughter of the people who had raised us, but had actually been adopted into the Morrison family 6 months before I arrived, when she was just 18 months old and too young to remember her origins, or the circumstances that had brought her into our family. The family had simply never told her the truth about her own adoption, creating an elaborate fiction about her birth and early childhood that had become so entrenched and accepted that even she believed it completely, and had built her entire identity around being the real Morrison daughter. Our parents had apparently made the conscious decision to hide Rachel's adoption status while being completely open and honest about mine, creating a family dynamic where I always knew I was chosen and wanted while Rachel believed she was entitled to her place in the family by right of birth and genetic connection that she thought made her superior. The irony of the situation was almost too perfect to believe. The sister who was rejecting me for not being real family was herself an adopted child who had no more biological connection to the Morrison family than I did, making her entire argument for excluding me based on adoption status completely hypocritical and self-defeating in the most spectacular way possible. The confrontation that followed my discovery of Rachel's adoption secret was unlike anything I had ever experienced in my life, a moment of absolute power and moral clarity that gave me the opportunity to respond to her cruelty with devastating truth and perfect poetic justice that would expose her hypocrisy in the most dramatic way possible. I had spent weeks debating whether to reveal what I had learned, struggling with the ethics of destroying someone's entire sense of identity and belonging, even after they had treated me so badly and caused me such profound pain and emotional damage. But Rachel's casual dismissal of our lifelong relationship, her willingness to exclude me from her wedding based on genetic prejudices that didn't even apply to her own situation, convinced me that she needed to understand the full hypocrisy of her position and the consequences of treating family relationships as disposable when they became socially inconvenient or potentially embarrassing. I arranged to meet with her again, this time bringing copies of all the documentation I had gathered about her real origins, including original birth certificates, official adoption papers, DNA test results, and family records that proved conclusively that she had no more biological connection to our parents than I did. When I spread these documents across the coffee shop table where she had delivered her devastating rejection just weeks earlier, I watched her face go through the same range of emotions I had experienced when she told me I wasn't real family. Confusion, disbelief, hurt, and finally a dawning realization that everything she thought she knew about herself was built on lies and deliberate deception. "Congratulations," I told her with the same casual cruelty she had shown me, savoring the moment of perfect justice. "You're not real family either. So I guess neither of us should be at your precious wedding according to your new standards and the Hendricks family requirements." The aftermath of my revelation about Rachel's true adoption status was swift and absolutely catastrophic for everyone involved, creating a family crisis that exposed decades of secrets and forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about identity, belonging, and the meaning of family relationships that had been carefully hidden and managed for over 20 years. Rachel's initial reaction was complete denial and desperate disbelief, insisting frantically that I must have fabricated the documents or made some kind of mistake in my research. But the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, supported by official government records and DNA analysis that couldn't be disputed, explained away, or dismissed as coincidence or clerical error. When she finally confronted our parents about the truth of her origins, demanding answers and explanations that they had hoped never to have to provide, they were forced to admit that they had been maintaining an elaborate deception for over 27 years, hiding Rachel's adoption while being completely transparent about mine in a misguided attempt to protect her from what they perceived as the stigma and confusion that might come from knowing she was adopted like me. The revelation completely destroyed Rachel's relationship with our parents, who she felt had betrayed her trust in the most fundamental way possible by lying about her identity and origins for her entire life, while allowing her to believe she was somehow superior to me because of her supposed biological connection to the family. But it also forced her to confront the complete hypocrisy of her decision to exclude me from her wedding based on adoption status that applied equally to both of us, making her realize that she had been willing to sacrifice our relationship based on a lie that she herself embodied without knowing it, making her own existence a contradiction of her newly adopted prejudices. The impact on Rachel's engagement and wedding plans was immediate and devastating, creating exactly the kind of family scandal and controversy that the status-conscious Hendricks family had been trying to avoid by requesting that only blood relatives be included in the celebration that was supposed to showcase their family's genetic superiority. When Mark's family learned that their future daughter-in-law was herself adopted and had been unknowingly deceiving them about her family background and genetic heritage that they valued so highly, they were absolutely furious about what they perceived as a fundamental breach of trust and honesty that called into question everything they thought they knew about Rachel. The investigation they had conducted into our family history had somehow missed Rachel's adoption records, possibly because they were sealed differently than mine, or filed under different names that hadn't appeared in their research, and they felt that they had been deliberately misled about the genetic lineage they were bringing into their family through this marriage that was supposed to elevate their social standing. Mark's mother, who had been so concerned about maintaining family authenticity by excluding me from the wedding, was horrified to discover that she had been planning to welcome someone into their family who didn't meet her own stringent bloodline requirements that she had used to justify rejecting me. The resulting family meetings and discussions became increasingly hostile and accusatory, with the Hendricks family demanding explanations and assurances that Rachel couldn't provide, since she had been just as deceived about her origins as everyone else involved in the situation and had no more answers than they did about her true background. The wedding that Rachel had spent over a year planning with obsessive dedication was ultimately called off just 3 weeks before the scheduled date, when Mark's family made it clear that they could no longer support a marriage that had been based on what they considered fundamental deceptions about family history and identity that went against everything they claimed to value. Mark himself seemed torn between his love for Rachel and his family's demands for what they called transparency and honesty in all family relationships. But ultimately, he chose to preserve his standing with his parents and extended family, rather than defend the woman he claimed to love against their prejudices and unreasonable demands for genetic purity. The cancellation of the wedding was a public humiliation for Rachel, who had to contact hundreds of guests, vendors, and service providers to explain that the elaborate celebration they had been preparing for was no longer happening, creating gossip and speculation throughout our small community about what could have gone so wrong so close to the wedding date. Today, 2 years after the wedding that never happened and the family crisis that tore us apart, Rachel and I have slowly begun the difficult process of rebuilding our relationship, though it will never be the same as it was before she chose social status over sisterhood and genetic prejudice over unconditional love. She has had to do significant therapeutic work to understand and address the internalized prejudices that led her to believe that adoption status made someone less valuable or less worthy of family inclusion and love. The extensive therapy she underwent to process the revelation about her own adoption helped her recognize that her treatment of me had been influenced by harmful societal messages about family worth that she had unconsciously absorbed and acted upon without examining their validity or fairness. She has apologized repeatedly and extensively for the pain she caused, acknowledging that her decision to exclude me from her wedding was motivated by insecurity and social climbing, rather than any legitimate concerns about family authenticity or appropriateness. Looking back now, I realize that my decision to reveal Rachel's adoption secret, devastating as it was for everyone involved, actually saved her from a marriage and family situation that would have been built on conditional acceptance and genetic prejudice that would have eventually caused serious problems in other areas of her life. Sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is truth, even when that truth causes pain and disruption that changes everything for everyone involved. When someone tries to erase you from their life based on prejudices and social climbing, sometimes the most effective response is to show them exactly what those same prejudices look like when applied to their own situation and identity.